From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul, Mission Control Deck, and most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Congratulations, Matt. Congratulations, Noel. Congratulations, Mission Control, codename Doc Holliday, and all our fellow conspiracy realists playing along at home. Tonight will be our most corny episode. Literally.
I'm not boom. Sorry, I was being Jonathan Davis. That was my Jonathan Davis impression.
As long as you don't rap. I have heard Noel freestyle, and Noel is way better than Jonathan Davis.
Well, you said it before, and I was like, you mean scat? I think the term you're looking for is scat. And then Ben pointed out that apparently there are some deep interior cuts, what one should never hear of Korn, where Jonathan Davis does in fact rap. He should stick to scatting and bagpipes.
Who are we to judge? You know,
we are exactly who we are to judge.
You know, guys, I was never really a big fan of that band Korn until I tried it with some butter. And then it really changed my life.
Oh, like that McDonald's ad with buttered corn. That confused
Sweet
the internet.
corn is what's... I will say this, guys, and we can move on from Korn, the band. I think their first couple of records are very unique. I don't think there were any other bands that sounded like that. I think there were a bunch of bands that copied them, and then they kind of had to sort of stay with the times, and they became more kind of rap rocky, Limp Bizkit. But I think their first two records hold up as pretty interesting records and a unique sound from a band that hadn't really been done before. I will die on that hill.
That's fine. That's a fine hill to die on. You could say something similar about Walt Whitman and Blank Verse with Leaves of Grass. You know what I mean? Excellent work. Created a lot of inspired a lot of work that is not necessarily for me. I get you. I hear you. And the bass lines on those early Korn albums, absolutely nasty. Utter poetry.
All the stuff that we're saying about Korn the band, you could technically say about Korn the crop.
It's bold. That's a bold statement. I don't agree, but I love it. So it's, we are diving into, as you said, Noel, we are diving into a conspiracy a lot of folks have maybe wondered about occasionally in the grocery store or maybe at your gas pump, but never really solved. Why does the United States have so much corn? Why did corn take over America? How did that happen? Here are the facts. It doesn't matter what sort of propaganda you read. It doesn't matter whom you're speaking with. Everyone knows by any measure, these United States are a corn superpower. As of just last year, 90 million acres of the entire country were committed to corn. Some folks in the industry and some folks outside of the industry, economists, in fact, call this stuff yellow gold. Not a super creative name.
Is it gold already kind of yellow?
I mean, I don't know how, in depth they went with the workshopping on that, but they do call it gold because it is a generative business. It is a billion-dollar business. You could actually, if we traveled back in time and talked to those alchemists who were trying to turn lead into gold, then we could realistically tell them about corn. They wouldn't have known about corn, and they would have said, why don't I just become a farmer?
What do you think would have happened if in their pursuit of turning lead to gold, they had accidentally turned it to corn? Do you think they would have been pleased or disappointed?
They would have been super hype. They would have gone so nuts.
They would have been like, devil, what is this substance before me?
Shout out Angry Alchemist. Yeah, it's like this industry, corn, as an agricultural product, touches on all sorts of other parts of the day-to-day experience in the United States. I think it was, we were looking into this off air in preparation for this episode. As of 2021, probably the most recent reliable numbers, the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, estimates the corn industry in this country alone is worth well over $86 billion.
Yes, and that is not just the raw product of corn, right? That is, as Ben said, the corn industry, because there is so much that has been built out of that crop for reasons we're going to get into, because you can't just make corn. You got to do stuff with it. And there's a reason for that, because we got so much of it.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Corn Palace? That's huge. That's built entirely out of corn.
Yeah. There's other stuff you can do with the crop too. And it's actually kind of astounding what you can do.
Yeah.
It is.
It's amazing. It's so versatile. Also, I want to give a wholesome shout out. We don't always get the opportunity to do this. I would like to give a wholesome shout out to that little American kid. He was like, what, 4, 5?
The corn kid?
Yeah, very young kid. The corn kid. Very young kid. Did
corn.
a good pun. Yeah, it's corn.
Love corn. He loves it.
Let's play just a little clip.
Oh, please. Yeah, because I don't think any of us are doing it right. He has his own kind of way about him.
I love corn.
All right, perfect. We all know the thing. Yeah.
See, now you get my reference with, I tried it with butter. Now you get it.
And it can happen to you too. That's what I love. This kid is Promethean. He's like, I will bring the idea of corn and butter to you. So why did this happen? If you look at the experts across the world, not just in agriculture, but in the world of economics, you'll find very interesting comments. The chief economist at the USDA was asked about why corn was such a big deal. And this guy explained it simply. He said, we're really good at it. His name's Seth Meyer, and he is right. He's not the famous Seth Meyer. He's the chief economist, Seth Meyer.
He's
unrelated.
Famous in his own circles, you know.
Sure, I hope so.
Yeah.
He does good work. He's unrelated to Saturday Night Live. The U.S. has the land, the climate. We're in the catbird seat as a country to grow corn. Most importantly, the U.S. has a very well-established infrastructure entirely meant to push corn out from the ground and to consumers across the world.
Yeah, exactly. And by the time, of course, the early days of corn, I don't think we even had a U.S. government. Wasn't corn one of those things that we basically stole from the Native Americans? The
100%.
maize? Yeah, exactly. So there was certainly a time where corn was less governed, let's say. We were all less governed. Before the U.S. government was actually a thing, corn was already a very well-established crop. According to writings in An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, to quote, indigenous American agriculture was based on corn. Since there is no evidence of corn on any other continent prior to its post-Columbus dispersal, its development is a unique invention of the original American agriculturists. For Ben, we're going to talk about Monsanto and bioengineering and all of that stuff. But how does one invent a crop in these our early days of the history of this land?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question, Noel. So the way that you do it is you find a cereal, a grain of some sort, and you over different harvest cycles, select for the traits that you desire. So the original thing, the original grain that leads to corn is not what you would find in a can today. It's way less cool in its original form. Corn as a story dates back 10,000 years ago to people in southern Mexico, and they figured out a way to reproduce for the traits that they were seeking. And I really appreciate that you bring up post-Columbus dispersal here, because there's a great, somewhat snarky, high-level history of corn in the U.S., which is automatically history of corn in North America is history of corn in the world. in 1493, Cristobal Colon, or Christopher Columbus, as he's known here, returned to Europe with all kinds of trash to talk. He also had a pocket full of corn seeds. He had seen native people growing and eating and using corn in his travels, and he knew this thing would be fire. You know what I mean? If he could convince the regimes of Europe at the time that they could invest in it, he knew he could change Western Europe. Unfortunately, he fumbled the ball pretty hard. He brought some corn seeds, not popcorn. He brought some corn seeds, but he did not know how to grow it. He did not know how to propagate it, how to treat the soil and the harvest correctly.
You just put it in the ground, right?
Well, yeah, that's it. You just put it in the ground. Well, that's why Europe is still very much wheat-based when you talk about grains to those folks. That's why they like muesli and stuff like that. Am I saying that right? Muesli?
I think so.
Muesli.
Soybeans?
Yeah. Was it muesli like a dry cereal that makes you poop?
Yeah, but it's not corn.
No, it's like human dog food. It's like grape nuts, but like worse.
All human food is human dog food.
Fair enough.
Well, except for chocolate.
I just mean it's like processed kind of kibble looking stuff.
Yeah. So the Europeans, they're not with it. They hear about the gold and silver, and of course they love the slavery, but they don't get on board with the corn. And an interesting division occurs in those two societies. Across the Atlantic Ocean, corn thrives. It is today an integral part of the economy and culture of all people living in the United States. Full stop, folks. It does not matter if you think you don't eat corn. You kind of do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, if you eat anything that's processed, basically, you're probably eating corn.
Mm-hmm.
If you open your mouth while you're outside, you're probably taking in a little bit of corn residue.
Just a little bit.
Via ethanol in some way, especially if you're near cars.
Which leads us to the other question. How did this get so big? Is there a conspiracy afoot? It's a good question. It might seem strange, might seem a little weird at first. The thing is, like you were saying, Matt, corn is ubiquitous in this country. Yeah, all right. You might go to a barbecue place. You might get a side of corn on the cob. You might go to the movies. You might eat popcorn. You might get other products that are visibly corn-based, but some version of corn is a sweetener. High fructose corn syrup is in so many things: potato chips, sodas, sauces, salad dressing, baked goods, cereal. It feeds poultry, it feeds cattle, it feeds fish. It would actually take longer to figure out what food products don't have corn somewhere in their process. Michael Pollan, author of a fantastic book called The Omnivore's Dilemma, he said it this way in an interview with NPR in 2003. He said, "Our entire diet has been colonized by this one plant." But our question tonight, how? How did that happen? Is there some stuff they don't want you to know behind the meteoric rise of corn?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, spoiler. But we're going to take an ad break. Here's where it gets crazy. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. There is a lot of stuff they don't want you to know, and we want you to know it. To take a line from another aspect of agribusiness, the idea of the corn conspiracy, while universally acknowledged, has become sort of a, wait for it, chicken and egg situation. We did it.
So the economist that we referenced earlier wasn't just blowing smoke. Corn has a lot of the traits that might make what would be considered an agricultural superhero, a sort of champion of the agriculture Olympics. It is incredibly versatile. It can grow in a number of different climates. It's resilient, very hardy, which is a term that I love. And it also benefits from a great deal of advancements that we've seen in technology, not to mention financial technology or innovation, let's just say. Some financial trickery at play here. And it might surprise you, but a little less than 10% of the absolutely astronomical amounts of corn that are grown in this country every year are actually eaten by humans. There's so many other uses for it, as you mentioned, Ben. Ethanol for fuel, feed for livestock. To the point where I was going to mention this earlier, the term corn-fed kind of becomes like a thing where we're talking about, corn-fed beef, or even like it's almost, I think, kind of like a term of derision for like people from certain parts of the country, like, yo, corn-fed good old boy or whatever. Like the stuff is just so ubiquitous that it really has kind of created this place in the culture of this country. Cows, for example, chickens, pigs, even some fish are fed this ground up food that is largely consisting of corn, and they eat several times the amount of corn that are consumed by folks like you or I every single year.
Well, it seems kind of crazy.
It's a little wild.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, right? Because we just named several industries that would seem ostensibly unrelated. Oh, what's your favorite salmon doing? Eating corn, right? I like the idea of corn-fed too. You're right, Noel. It's on the level of a real meat and potatoes person, right? So we know that this thing is huge. We just learned that humans eat a very small percentage of the pie here, and that's because not all corn is created equally. There are many, many different varieties. Technically speaking, maize, street name corn, is a cultigen. Cultigen means that you need to have human intervention for the thing to propagate. It's kind of like how some species of dogs don't reproduce well on their own, and it's really sad, right? Like, what is it? Bulldogs. Bulldogs can have trouble reproducing on their own. Maize, corn, it's got the human touch on it. It needs to have active human intervention in different key stages of the growth to harvest process. And usually, while there are many, 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 many types of corn, usually when we're talking about corn from the United States, we're talking about 3 rough varieties. The little golden boy is sweet corn. That's what you eat when you know you're eating corn. It's the stuff in the cans. It's the stuff on the cob. It is at best 1% of the total amount of corn grown in America. Very, very small.
That's what you think of when you think corn. Like that's
Sure.
what you see in your brain, right? That corn.
That's
But
what
then-
that kid's eating. With the, it's yellow cob. It's got like a nice little pat of equally yellow butter, thanks to food coloring.
Maybe it's got little things that are poked into either end that are also themselves shaped like corn, creating a meta situation that would boggle the minds of any visitors from another planet.
We heard you like corn, dog. So we put some corn outside of your corn.
And what if those little things had then sticks within them that were also tinier pieces of corn? It could just go on forever like that. And that, my friends, is relativity.
Yeah. Well, and then there's another slightly larger percentage of corn that you may also think about. It comes in bags that you can toss in the microwave. It comes in little tin things that you could toss on the stove. And it's also used in other things, not just for popcorn, but it's basically popcorn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was it's called flint corn. Back in the 1960s, Jiffy Pop comes out. And Jiffy Pop has exactly what you're referring to, Matt. The idea that you could take a pie tin, essentially, with aluminum foil over the top, and then you could rotate, there's an art to it. You could rotate it over a stove at like medium to high heat, and you could make popcorn. just like in your favorite movie theater. Then the microwave comes out, and so, of course, in the 1970s and 1980s, and even now, more and more people are buying microwavable popcorn. Shout out to our previous episodes about dangerous chemicals in food. The lining in microwave popcorn is double plus ungood.
Yeah, not great for you. Keep in mind that date range there in the 1960s and forward. Keep that in mind as we move into the next section we're going to talk about, because there's a reason that type of corn became more and more popular as a thing to sell.
Mm-hmm. And still, okay, so we had sweet corn. That's the special golden boy. We have flint corn, which is now freely available, but it is also still a very small percentage of total corn. The bulk of the corn game, the stuff you see by the interstate when you're driving through Iowa, that is overwhelmingly going to be what's called field corn or dent corn. It is in most of the animals that you eat. If you buy meat in America, it's fed to them. It's a huge part of the livestock process because it is so affordable. It is so cost effective. And then also, it's what makes high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah. It's shot directly into your veins via your mouth via the Coca-Cola company.
Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of scary.
You guys, I just found out one of my best friends growing up who was in theater with me
was a pile of corn.
No, I literally found out today, and I just saw it in on LinkedIn because I had a weird dream with them in it. This person, I won't name anybody, but this person is one of the top legal people, like literally the top, I think, legal person at Coca-Cola.
Good.
Wow.
Can you get us some free samples of some of that weird European soda?
No, but I think it's time to investigate further this whole corn syrup thing.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think we can solve it pretty easily. It's a function of economy of scale, right? It's much more expensive to have an alternate version of this because the U.S. makes corn stupid cheap for everybody. The U.S. is very, very much a bad example of a drug dealer when it comes to the world of corn. So I will expand this analogy. I promise it will work. Before we do that, here's why. The U.S. makes corn amazing through the use of things called subsidies, corporate welfare. Farm subsidies or agricultural subsidies, if we want to put a little bow tie on it, they are payments and other forms of support extended by Uncle Sam to farmers and agribusiness. And corn is by far the biggest recipient of those concessions. When we say payments and other kinds of support, what I mean here is things like very advantageous loans, things like insurance. Like if you're a farmer, very stressful occupation. You got to try and build a house every year. And you got to hope that the house doesn't get blown down. And it can happen. There are variables beyond your control.
But Ben, corporate welfare, that sounds like the kind of thing that certain individuals in business don't care for. Welfare is bad. People should be pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Why should we be getting welfare help from the government?
Yeah, well, exactly, because ultimately a subsidy is a tax on everybody, right? That then goes to certain individuals or certain corporations, which is why there were no farm subsidies of any kind up until all of a sudden there were in the 1930s.
I love it. Subsidy is a tax. That's
all it is.
That's very good.
Well, yeah, it's just a reallocating of funds,
Yes.
and then we're paying it, it's going somewhere. But I guess, is the term corporate welfare, is that sort of a loaded term that people who are like against this practice might use to sort of draw the similarities, like how it's sort of like a double standard where so many people are against welfare for individuals, but yet welfare for corporations is okay?
It can be weaponized for sure, right?
Mm-hmm. All language can, any technology can. I love the point of farm subsidies previous to preceding the Great Depression. Not really a thing. You would get some sweetheart deals if you're a big time rancher or farmer, you know what I mean? And you would say, oh, I agree with Blobbity-Blah's clause or your bigger aim. So why don't you cut me a deal on these taxes, or on these tariffs?
Especially in times of war, right? If you think about World War I prior to 1930, like there were reasons to produce a whole bunch of food, make as much food as we possibly can. There's an article here called The Origin of American Farm Subsidies from the Foundation of Economic Education. And there's just a tiny little story in here that the author, Burton Folsom, points out. And it's from the Secretary of Agriculture in and around the mid 1890s, a guy named J. Sterling Morton. And when he was approached specifically in this story by beet sugar producers, they came to Washington. They were like, hey, we need some help. We need some kind of government, loan or, some kind of money from the government, which at the time would have been taxes. The response from the Secretary of Agriculture at the time said, quote, those who raise corn should not be taxed to encourage those who desire to raise beets. The power to tax was never vested in a government for the purpose of building up one class at the expense of other classes.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating that he used corn producers in the example.
Yeah. Because as we will see, those are two industries that continue beefing today. I'm choosing the word beefing on purpose. Anyway, shout out Celeste Headley, shout out Big Sugar. In 1930, the U.S. did a census, and they found that about 1 out of every 4 people in the country, around that time, that was about 30 million people, 1 out of 4 of those people lived on farms and ranches. And they estimated that there were about 6.5 million different farms and ranches. That is no longer the case. The number has dramatically decreased. Most people, not just in the U.S., but in the world overall, live in what we would call urban metropolitan areas, conurbations. Big cities just keep growing, and then they become one big city themselves, right? And this trend will continue. There are fewer and fewer people living on a mom and pop farm. But even while those mom and pop farms disappeared, farm subsidies from Uncle Sam remained, and they overwhelmingly assist not actual people now, huge corporations, very powerful entities. Those mom and pop farmers still get brought up every single election year in political rhetoric. But if you are hearing this now in 2023, actually, if you're hearing this anytime past 2023, you need to understand those mom and pop farmers, they are at best an endangered species. Corporations are wearing sheep clothing, and they are pretending to be something you can relate to so they can take more of your money and put more corn in your stuff.
Well, it's sort of like a lot of the craft breweries, quote unquote, that have basically just been bought up by Bushmills or Anheuser-Busch rather, and like these large, mega corporations that now are kind of masquerading as like these small little operations that they once were, but now they're not. They've bought them up and everything that goes along with it. I guess some of them continue doing business in a smaller way, but they are still, a wing of a large corporate entity. And I apologize to guys if I was being weird earlier when I was talking about like the corporate welfare thing. I guess in my mind, to your point, Ben, I guess I just think of farming now in the modern day as being largely these big corporations. To what you were just saying, but Matt, you said not the case.
Well, I'm only shaking my head. I had an opportunity to drive from like the coast just north of Georgia down through a bunch of farmland back to Atlanta not long ago. And if you make that drive, if you take like state roads and not a major interstate, you will see that it is almost all farmland. Yeah. All farmland. And it is small farmers. It was like, a couple of acres. You can see the clear delineation, it's not like they don't have a ton of huge equipment. They've got the equipment necessary to farm that small amount of land.
And John Deere is screwing them over, by the way.
Exactly. Farmers are getting hit left and right with the amount of money they have to put in just to get one crop out for 1 year, right? And one of the only ways they can successfully do that is if they get paid extra or a little bit more by the government through these subsidies to plant something like corn, one of the 5 crops that they will pay for. There's other ones like you can get some money for peanuts and a couple other crops.
Soy.
Yeah, but it's mostly those primary ones that we talked about, right? Corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, rice. Those are the big 5.
Nailed it.
But it is still small farmers. They have to play the game or else they can't make enough money to survive.
Mm-hmm. And these folks are, at any given year, they are getting pushed by large corporations. The octopuses we're talking about want to buy their land, often for a song, right? Because they're private corporations, so they don't have to practice eminent domain. So
you can still work the land. It's still your farm.
Sure.
But we own it, and you gotta, a certain percentage or whatever goes to us. We've seen it. We've talked about that before. Guys, it's just so it's pretty infuriating. At some point, I'm going to give you another quote from the 1920s, right before this era we hit here, where we're talking about subsidies and as they arise because of a perceived need, and actually an actual need. I think we're about to hit the Great Depression, right?
Yeah, we've been going toward that. Yeah, but what you're saying is to put it in a pithy line, these corporations are saying, surf the bottom line with us, peasant. Ride the wave. Hashtag no pun left behind. The original intent of the U.S. farm subsidies was to provide economic stability to farmers, to a largely agrarian population during the Great Depression, and importantly, to ensure a steady domestic food supply. However, they really, not necessarily the U.S. government. Hoover kind of shut the bag. But overall, I think it was the corporate interest of the U.S. who created the Great Depression. And if that sounds like a hot take, please write in because we are correct. The issue here was that it didn't work. It was $1 short, a day late. There were farmers who were purposely destroying their crops or their livestock or products thereof so that they could ensure higher prices because they needed those prices to be higher to survive. So at the same time, people are slaughtering hogs. People are pouring milk into creeks out in middle America. There are folks in large urban centers, Chicago, New York, name it, any of the good ones. Those people are starving. They can't get the milk. They can't get the food. This idea made sense over time. The U.S. agrees to farm subsidies due to a sort of nationwide PTSD, a traumatic event. It's absolutely mission critical that these things exist. It might be surprising to hear us say this, but think about it. One bad year, honestly, one evil month can spell doom for a single farm. And one bad year for multiple farms can spell doom for an entire piece of agriculture in the grand calculation of events. In the slippery slope of the greater good, Farm subsidies are a money-saving effort. You keep those folks in business, you help them survive for one bad year, you are saving money in terms of what you will need to spend later if the food is not there. So it's kind of like you get a pizza every week. 1 week the pizza doesn't come through, you still pay for the pizza because you're going to be hungry later.
I've got to do this, guys. We got to jump really quickly to the 1920s, right before Hoover and all of this that you're talking about, Ben. Because there's a guy in office named Calvin Coolidge. He was in there from 23 to 1929, and there was a bill that was pretty similar to what became the original farm subsidies bills that Hoover and then Roosevelt passed as the Great Depression was hitting. And it feels a lot like that Titanic moment that we've talked about before. Some great disaster that occurs so that the change can come through, right? So that the populace is willing for some change. Because in the 1920s, when Coolidge was president, there was this bill. It's called the McNary-Haugen Bill, Haugen. And it was a bill that Congress passed, and it had to do with price fixing on crops, right? But the conspiratorial part of it was that there was going to be a system of human beings in Washington, D.C., essentially bureaucrats, who would decide the prices of things, right? So then the farmers, each individual farmer, would be beholden to whatever the bureaucrats in Washington were going to say. And when that bill, which was, again, passed by Congress, got to Coolidge's desk, he vetoed the thing. And he said, no, the American people don't actually want this. Basically, this is business coming in, trying to dictate how farmers are going to act and what they're going to have to do. I want to give you just a super short quote here. Coolidge said, quote, "I do not believe that upon serious consideration, the farmers of America would tolerate the precedent of a body of men chosen solely by one industry who, acting in the name of government, shall arrange for contracts which determine prices, secure the buying and selling of commodities, the levying of taxes on that industry, and to pay for losses on foreign dumping of any surplus. There is no reason why other industries, copper, coal, lumber, textiles, and others, in every occasional difficulty, should not receive the same treatment by the government. Such action would establish bureaucracy on such a scale as to dominate not only the economic life, but the moral, social, and political future of our people." He went a little hard on the paint there at the end. But
I agree, though. That's you got two big moments there, because as anyone knows, the one of the issues with that predecessor bill is that it was framed as a price dictated, non-negotiable. It was not phrased as a minimum price. You can build a floor. America loves it when you build a floor. Hates it when you build a ceiling. But will do it if, depending on how their backroom finances work out. But the second thing was the idea of foreign dumping. Could you describe foreign dumping for us?
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, if you've got way too much of a product, you try and sell it abroad for pennies on the dollar. You get rid of it, basically, if possible, which is a thing that occurs when there are surpluses. It's still something that happens.
So if there is, for instance, a way, just making an argument here for funsies, if there is a way to grow wheat in, say, a good part of India, and it is much cheaper to produce it there, and there's no tariff, there's no international muckety-muck, if you can sell that wheat to people who live in Western Europe, where it is very expensive to make wheat, would that be foreign dumping?
I don't think so. That sounds like good business to me.
Oh, good. Oh, tight. Oh, God. Someone call Calvin. All right. He figured it out. Oh, okay.
Calvin Coolidge?
Yeah, he was, I think, the original rhythm guitarist for Korn. Also an American president for a minute. But
yeah, his nickname was Monkey.
Well, honestly, I haven't thought about that guy until I read that article. I don't. When's the last time you thought about Calvin Coolidge?
Pretty often.
I think he's got one of the best names, best presidential names. It sticks with me. I'm not joking. When I think of, whenever I hear the name Calvin, I think of Calvin Coolidge before I even think of that little kid pissing on the swastika.
The precedents, the precedents of the presidents leading up to the American Depression, the first one at least, are of intense interest to me. And they should be of intense interest to you in the immediate future, folks. Matt, you're talking about something that more people need to understand. Our farm subsidies stuff can sound a little bureaucratic and dry. Here's the real thing. Let's peek behind the curtain. Why do countries really like farm industry supplements and subsidies? Why do they really want this stuff to happen? It goes down to our boy Henry Kissinger's realpolitik reasoning, and it's much older than Kissinger in the United States and in the...
He was still living last we checked, right?
Yeah. He just dropped by China
Kissinger watch?
punk John Kerry.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. No, I get alerts. So
there's a widget. There's a dashboard widget on Ben's phone. It's connected up to Kissinger's pacemaker.
So the U.S. and no comment. The U.S. and the European Union, to a large degree, yeah, you could say they're practicing corporate welfare. There's a big old sloppy financial kiss on the quarterly bottom line, right? Or annual at least. But the brutal open secret about this is that at all times, since the day you emerged, your entire life, anyone in charge of any nation you have ever heard of is continually low-key planning for war, open conflict. And if international trade breaks down, a lot of countries are immediately going into disaster mode. So that means even in times of ostensible peace, if you are a leader, you make sure your country, to the absolute highest degree possible, will not be reliant on potential enemy forces for basic things: food, shelter, water. And the tricky part about this, human history teaches you one constant truth. Every single nation is a potential enemy. There are no friends. And, you might have a good couple decades getting your avocados, right? You might have a good 100 years with great rice supplies. And maybe you've had your differences with another country, but that doesn't stop the flow of rice. When the bridges break down, can you feed the people who follow you? That is why these subsidies exist. So yes, the U.S. is good at growing corn. It will not stop. It should not stop. This is a cycle of money and path dependence. And the problem is that truth creates a feedback loop. And that loop is very, very dangerous, not just to the U.S., but to the world.
Yeah, especially when you can't eat the corn, right?
You can't eat most of it. You could, have you guys ever eaten non-sweet corn? Like regular corn?
Popcorn's great.
Not flint corn, just like the field corn.
What about blue corn? The kind they make like the good tortillas with and stuff. And there's probably various types of corn that I've eaten that have been made into other products, but probably wouldn't be that great right on the cob. Is that what we're getting at?
Like heirloom corn? Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here is the majority of corn that you will not eat, it's not super delicious. My heart goes out to the corn kid. He's going to learn about this. He's going to have to learn about it on the streets.
Yeah. Ben, just before we get to that feedback loop, because this is one of the most important things we're going to talk about this episode, I just want to go back to that USDA survey from the 1930s that found 1 in 4 Americans lived on a farm, worked on a farm. Farming was a part of their life, right? Think about that as a voting block in the 1930s. If you're a politician, you need to get the farmers on your side, especially if you're anywhere near the center of the United States, like Texas. Let's just go through the states, the biggest subsidy states. Corn Belt? Yeah, it's Iowa, Texas, Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota, and just shout out to Paul Mission Control Deck and a little Kansas in there too, and a bunch of other states. But you need those folks to vote for you, especially if it's the 1930s all the way up to the 1923s. It's not the farmers that went to Washington, D.C. with that bill, because they wanted to have safety in knowing if they grew their crop, the government could help them out if things didn't go well, right? At the top of this episode, we talked about all the factors that a farmer has to deal with that means they're going to have a great year or a terrible year, right? You want to have some kind of thing to fall back on. I know I'm still going to get money and the government will help me even if stuff goes sideways. But it's not them. It's not the farmers, the individual farmers going to Washington to put these things in place, to have bureaucrats and make these things. It's industry that comes together and says, hey, guys, we have a common goal here. We just want to make sure y'all are going to be okay, right? Everything's going to be fine. And then bring in your mind, bring in all the stuff that Ben just outlined there with like the reason why a government, why a country needs to do these things. When you put them together, you get this icky thing that on the surface, politicians will say it's for the farmer, right? But that's not really what it's for. They're a chess piece.
It's an optical thing. I mean, it's an optical illusion is what it is. I mean, they're basically like parading these, salt of the earth individuals who have been making their, families lived multi-generations perhaps on this land. And they're using them as a way to kind of like wave this flag of like the American dream. And see, you got to help these people. But it's really just a subterfuge, right?
Ugh.
Well, at the heart of it, there's the greater good argument, as ever. The feedback loop is this. Right now, the U.S. government subsidizes the production of corn alone to the tune of billions of dollars a year, more than 2 billion, well, more than 3 probably. The result is a perpetuation of growing goals. If you've ever worked for a corporation, you might have found yourself in that weird Larry David Kafka-esque moment where they say, hey, yeah, you did a great job this year. You met these insane goals we gave you, but we have these things called shareholders, which means that as a reward for meeting our crazy goals, you have to meet even crazier goals the next year. That's kind of what's happening with the U.S. and with the corn industry. The farming industry realized that the more corn they grow, the more money they will generate for themselves. And I'm not talking about people. We're not talking about people here. We're talking about institutions. And they are thus incentivized to grow more and more corn. Next step of the feedback loop, the more corn that's out there, you've increased the supply, right? We've increased the supply, so we lower the demand, meaning we lower the price, meaning that if there is a possible application for an ever cheaper commodity in any industry, you will go with that because that lowers the overall price of your weird grift. So if you are selling gasoline and you realize there is a heavy financial incentive for you to, not try to make corn gas, which is kind of it's not a feasible idea. But if you get enough money to put 10% ethanol in your gasoline, then of course you'll do it. Then it's like what's that game theory? It's like the prisoner problem in game theory. If you don't do it, and everyone else is doing it, then you are taking a hit, a 10% hit that will be magnified and compounded throughout your supply chain. The more corn there is, the lower the price, the more you want to use it. That is why the United States, despite all the other stuff it says, that's why they will always seek a way to substitute corn products into any industry. I know we've got to go to an ad break, Paul, but like everybody, think about it. 2 huge oil producers in the world, Norway, Saudi Arabia, they're not about to go full into corn. Why the would they? They would have to buy that corn from somewhere else. They can't grow it. Uncle Sam has a cheat code. It would be foolish not to exploit that cheat code. I don't know. I mean, maybe I sound crazy, but I think that feedback loop, that convenience can lead to an addiction. What do you guys think?
Dependence. Yeah. Certainly dependence.
Path dependence.
Agreed. I said agreed, but I basically just said greed. And I think both of those holds true.
Well, but let's take a quick break and let's come back and let's talk numbers, like real numbers, not just on corn, on farm subsidies in general in this country, because it's nuts. No, it's corn. It's corny. No,
it's corn nuts.
It's corn nuts, guys.
And we have returned. Matt, I'm going to give you an alley-oop for the dunk here. Can an industry be dependent upon subsidies? Absolutely. In 2019, so still pretty reliable numbers as we record a few years later, in 2019, the U.S. subsidized $2.2 billion of your money. By the way, if you're listening to this in the United States, it doesn't matter whether you are a citizen of the United States. Every time you had to pay sales tax, every time old Uncle Sam came looking for his vig, a little bit of that went to corn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, he just said that in such a matter-of-fact way. I love it.
It's weird. Yeah. Like when you imagine paying taxes, think of it as, okay, so we're okay with paying taxes at a gas station, right? You get your gas, you have a tax paid for every gallon of gas. Here in the US, still use gallons. So imagine it a little bit differently. What if there was a guy in the garish Uncle Sam costume, top hat, stripes and stars or whatever, and as you're pumping gas, old boy walks up to you and he's like, hey, can I get a little bit of that for I'm doing a corn thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's odd. Look, it's also odd considering that just, it's another one of these kind of antiquated bits of infrastructure that we should have figured out a way around, but we've spent all this time figuring out how to kind of bilk taxpayers out of their, money for these subsidies that we're sort of, like you said, Ben, dependent or addicted to some degree on it, even though really there are so many better ways of using that could be maybe for R&D for more efficient fuel sources or for more efficient electric vehicles and things like that. It just seems like it's feeding into a system that is totally past its prime. But yet somehow there's so many stakeholders that need it to be the system.
Well, it's crazy. Okay. Imagine if houses cost the same as our grandparents paid for houses right now.
Oh,
That'd be cool. That'd be great.
It would be amazing.
You guys have grandparents?
No, not anymore. But,
yeah, in theory, we did. Yes.
Yeah, at one point.
Or how about just our parents? The price that our parents paid for homes, if they were able to buy a home, if that stayed the same, think about all of the money generated over time for the huge amount of people that grew their incomes, basically, went this way because of the real estate business and accruing, the amount of money that they did for those homes that they didn't pay for. Now, imagine if corn cost the exact same as it did in the 1930s, right? At the time that these things were put in place. Imagine if it cost the same. How would any farm make any money? It's got to go up. It has to. Right?
It has to expand.
That's just the nature of business and capitalism, though. It's the same thing as that we see with publicly traded companies. They have to show year-over-year growth or else they've failed. And sometimes to even show that year-over-year growth, it requires a lot of creative accounting and perhaps things that aren't entirely above board. Not naming names or saying any accusations, but I think we all understand that there's some trickery at play in these kinds of things. It's not possible. Infinite growth forever is cancer.
You're being really anti-Coolidge right now, and I just want you to know I don't appreciate it.
I'm sorry,
I don't appreciate it. It's not very uncoolidge of you, dude.
That is so
uncoolidge. No, it's a very good point. Let's go to Joseph Glauber. Joseph Glauber is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. They've got some horses and corn cobs in the game, but they do some good research. This guy was also, once upon a time, the chief economist of the USDA, just like our boy Seth Meyer, who regrettably has not yet made it onto SNL. But Seth, if you're hearing this, I think you'd be a bang-up host, man.
He's got jokes.
Yeah.
They're all agriculture-based, but I mean, it's a niche kind of operation.
Maybe it's time. You know what I mean? I like it. So anyway, this guy, Joseph Glauber, he says, quote, a lot of these subsidies get embedded into the cost of farmland, and they essentially bid up the price of farmland marginally over time, so the benefits accrue largely to those who own land. To your point, Matt, if you got in the game early, you're always going to have a compounding advantage, right? And that is the history of the United States.
Totally.
So, yeah, as of last year, 2022, as we record this, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, some of my favorite nerds in the game, they looked at the insurance program that the U.S. government gives to large agribusiness and the remaining mom and pop farmers. And they said spending on this program, this one facet of the subsidies alone, is going to increase from 2021 to nearly $40 billion through 2025. It's a big, big business. And we have to understand that the folks in charge of this country, private and public or state representatives alike, they are playing the long game. They know that the U.S. needs to have a domestic supply of things, but corn is no longer just a domestic supply of food. It's never been just that. So why are they providing all this support? Is it because they're saying, hey, we're good, we care about our voters, we want corn to remain as it is, a very helpful thing? Or is corn only in the conversation because it has such a financial grift around it? Is it because of the political corruption? We got to say, there are a lot of lobbying interests, and those interests have an existential concern with the subsidy checks. Like, they're very powerful agricultural interests that are entirely positioned toward corn. And past a certain point, to your idea earlier, Matt, past a certain point, the actual corn doesn't matter as much as the money supplying the corn, the futures, the betting, the speculation, the guaranteed income at the end of the year, no matter what happens to the soil.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so many vested interests. And Ben, I want to blow it out one more time just to include those, the 5 crops that are subsidized most heavily by the U.S.
Rice, wheat, soy,
cotton,
corn.
Those are them. And then just the honorable mentions.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to list those too. These are fun. Peanuts.
Yeah.
Sorghum, you said, and mohair.
Mohair, like the suits?
Yeah, it's the stuff that comes off of specific goats that's like really luxurious.
So I always thought it was mole hair for the longest time. like in that it's in the lyric in that Benny and the Jets. You got electric boots, a mohair suit. I read it in a magazine. I thought it was mole hair for the longest time. I'm like, oh, the mole hair must be the finest and softest of hairs to be made into the finest of suits that a man like Elton John would wear.
Well, yes. I want to give you two quick stats before we keep going, because I see exactly where we're headed here, Ben. This is from an article titled "How Farm Subsidies Affect the U.S. Economy." It was written for The Balance by Kimberly Amadeo in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
Just a couple of quick quotes from this. In 2020, the combined agriculture and food industry made up 5% of the U.S. economy. That's a pretty big chunk. It's not crazy. It's like not one of the only things we do, but 5% of the entire U.S. economy. It employed 19.7 million full-time and part-time workers, which is about 10.3% of all U.S. employment. Think about that. Over 10% of all U.S. employment is tied in with these businesses, most of them making, these staple crops. And in that time, corn is the nation's biggest crop. More than 15.1 billion bushels of corn were grown just in the year 2021, which is the second highest amount on record. That's 2021, when, coming out of the pandemic, which is so crazy to think about. So that's all of farming, right? Big numbers, a lot of statistics, kind of boring. But here's where it gets nuts. There's another article titled Total Subsidies in the United States from 1995 to 2021. It was created by the Environmental Working Group. You can look this up. There were over 4,380,000 recipients of subsidies for, farmland, right? That's a ton. Like those are individuals, right? In the top 5, I just want to give you a couple of these. I'll give you the top 2, and they're rice based.
Oh, can you do the top 3?
I'll do the top 3. Yeah, let's keep it in rule of threes. First one is Riceland Foods Incorporated. They're based in Arkansas. They received over $554 million in subsidies from 95 to 2021. Farm Services Agency, they're based in Washington, D.C. at least. They received over $346 million in subsidies. And Producers Rice Mill received over $314 million in that time period, which is just to show you, those are only the top 3 of millions of farm subsidies recipients. And these are massive businesses. Think about that amount of money going in to a company, right?
Oh, I was going to say literacy, healthcare, food security.
Oh, but yeah.
It is kind of food security, though. Like this, you're right, man. This is an absolutely astounding amount of cash, right? In a very capitalism-driven world,
and that cash turns into potential political influence.
100% it does. Right? Yeah. It is. Let's get to that part. Look, what we're saying, to be clear right now, there's a thing coming out called the Farm Bill. Like our pal Celeste mentioned, you as a resident of the U.S., you don't get to vote on the Farm Bill. It's a thing that comes up every 5 years. Your elected representatives can weigh in on it. And as our pal Celeste Headley, creator of Big Sugar, said, you owe it to yourself and the people who come after you and the people who live around the world with you. You owe it to yourself to push your elected representatives to make some changes on the Farm Bill. Now, we're not saying that all the politicians voting to continue the egregious mistakes of the Farm Bill are somehow Illuminati. They're not like crazed assholes or anything. But what it does mean is they have acknowledged an ironclad truth about governance in this country. It is very popular to create a subsidy for the powerful. It is, from that point, very easy to continue growing that subsidy. Mission creep is a real thing in every industry. But at the same time, it becomes increasingly difficult and dangerous to roll that benefit back. To your example, Matt, what if of those top 3 subsidies you just named, what if there were a lone politician saying, pull those subsidies entirely? I think they would not get reelected, and I am very confident in that thought.
Well, the heartland is always such a big political talking point in general, I mean, for good or bad. I mean, it's just the idea of like protecting the good men and women of America that, built this country into what it is today. I mean, and it's like maybe they don't have as much political capital as like the big cities, but they represent something, and because of the nature of, I guess, elections, they do matter. And those, that's why do you think Iowa is such an important political stop? Like it sort of kicks off the whole season, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big thing. American politicians, U.S. politicians in particular, typically play toward a romanticized version of the U.S. that does not actually exist. It's a rose-colored glasses thing. As a colorblind person, I find that hilarious. I know we're going long. There are a couple of things we want to hit real quick. Points of interest in your journey. We invite you to take the journey on your own, folks, and contact us about it. 1-833-STDWYTK, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com. You can find us on your favorite Ouija board. We mentioned earlier, the sugar or sucrose industry is beefed up with the corn or fructose industry. Back in 2011, trade associations representing growers of sugarcane and sugar beets or sucrose went to court arguing that a lobbying group for high fructose corn syrup, the Corn Refiners Association, was behind a conspiracy to deceive the public because they wanted to change the name of high fructose corn syrup to corn sugar on all your ingredient labels. Technically accurate. Accurate.
But you got to process the living hell out of that corn in order to make high fructose corn syrup. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things. Listen to the episode. We did one where we talk about high fructose corn syrup in particular. Mm-hmm. And it's an awful thing. You got to break that corn way down using nasty stuff you don't want to put in your body.
Right. Yes, that is true. It takes some poison to make the antidote, does it not? The thing is, these forces are further incentivized to normalize the presence of corn at the heart of American consumption. It does not stop at your local soda can. It does not stop at your local gas station, nor at your local quesadilla plate. Oh, God. Quesadillas probably have high fructose corn syrup.
You don't need a plate for a quesadilla. That's sort of the beauty of what makes it a quesadilla.
Right?
Kind of got a built-in plate,
Oh, man. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. That does matter.
You need a plate, however, for a chimichanga, because that's a real saucy affair, and things can get really messy real quickly.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of things getting messy, there is some trouble on the horizon as we end tonight's episode. The United States currently exports about 13% of its corn products abroad in some form. Simply put, going back to the drug dealer analogy we said we'd explain earlier, this is a dealer who consumes most of their own supply. This is like your buddy in college who smoked so much weed that they started selling a little bit of weed so they could get a discount on all the weed they smoke. Other players want in on the game, and this gives us an opportunity to talk about one of the funniest related conspiracies. Kid you not, there are real-life corn spies right now. CORN, not just some folks stalking Jonathan Davis. In 2016, a guy named Mao Halong got popcorned for a 5-year conspiracy.
I just picture these guys as like just blending in with the stalks, like dressed in some sort of corn accoutrement. I don't know
like
why.
A scarecrow?
Yeah, maybe so. Or literally just dressed. They got to be really skinny to apply. Just literally, dressed as like a piece of corn, a corn on the cob. That's a popular costume for holiday times, right?
Well, yeah. Oh, for sure. But this guy was literally trying to steal corn seeds, right? Like going out, like Johnny Appleseeding, reverse Johnny Appleseeding corn.
Much less interesting, but much more nefarious than my whole concept.
Well, or from his perspective, he was being very much Johnny Appleseed.
Ah,
you know what I mean?
Right.
He was spreading, he was propagating. Why do you get to own this improvement? Why is it for your country's benefit rather than my own? You know what I mean? It's a good question.
Because we're Monsanto.
Bum, bum, bum. Oh, that's farmers. So, this guy is employed by a Chinese corn seed company, and U.S. companies, DuPont, Pioneer, and Monsanto, they own the patent to a lot of hybrid, what are called non-terminating seeds. This is a very big deal because for a while, there were these hybrid seeds put out that would grow very well in all sorts of conditions, but they would not reproduce on their own. They would not, you would have to buy new seeds. Even though they're a cultigen, even if you tried to farm them, you would not make a new crop unless you bought another batch of seeds. So being able to make something that can just boom, boom, boom you through multiple harvest seasons, that's a big deal. The FBI popped this guy. The FBI popped him in 2016. He's sentenced to 3 years in prison. And then he also has to give up 2 separate farms he owns, one in Iowa, one in Illinois, because they were purchased as a cover for his weird corn spy activities. That's how deep it gets. The U.S. government and its corporate masters are in a corn cold war right now. Brazil, Argentina, Canada, they're making inroads. Just 4 days ago, Brazil made a pretty big legal move. It'll probably take too long to explain, to increase their stake in the global corn game. They want to be the next U.S. for corn. And they want to do the same things that the U.S. has done with this power. We mentioned ethanol. We didn't even get to it. I guess we should say before we end, the corn itself is not the problem. Corn is a solid crop. It's awesome. It grows phenomenally well in the U.S. It played a huge role in the current American experiment. The farmers themselves were never the problem. People were farming this way before the United States ever existed. People who actively create stuff in these kind of situations, they are almost never going to be the problem. But the people who take advantage of those people, they have some different aims. You know, logically, the U.S. has to take corn to the highest, most extreme degree of usability, right? Of utilization. But given that feedback loop of profit, the U.S. may encounter diminishing returns. And as corny as it sounds, thank you. Tip your server. The corn game is rife with conspiracy. No one wants to stop it. It is in no one's best interest right now to be the voice of opposition to this. I don't know.
Well, everybody knows it's a problem. And right before we started talking, doing this episode, we were talking about the New York Times and other major outlets reporting in 2004, 2005, 2002 about how horrible it is that all of us have to pay all these taxes in order to support all of these subsidies, because it's just this growing, ballooning thing that's gotten out of control in 2005. And nothing's changed. It's all the same. Nobody's going to stop it. The farm bill's coming up. What are we going to do? Hey, this seems wrong. Too bad. Click. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to be a downer, but
you're absolutely correct. And I got to tell you guys, this evening, I am in love with the idea that every time I pay taxes on anything, this old white guy in Stars and Stripes comes up and asks me for extra money and tells me something very weird that he's going to do with it. You know, like, oh, that 99-cent pack of gum or whatever, that's actually $1.09. And all of a sudden this guy comes up and is like, I need 10 cents for plutonium.
Yeah, we need more cluster munitions for Ukraine. Oh.
Right. And then what am I going to do? Tell him no? It's a dime. Anyway, this is the story as it stands now. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We cannot wait to hear from you, especially if you are affiliated to any degree with any of the industries we mentioned in tonight's show. We hope that you reach out and let us know what you think. Is there a way from the path dependence upon corn? Is there a way to reimagine this industry to the advantage of current and later generations? Tell us.
You can tell us, and we hope you will, by reaching out to us at either of our internet handles of choice, Conspiracy Stuff, on the social media network formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram and TikTok.
Hey, do you want to use your phone and call us? Call 1-833-STDWYTK. It's really simple. You get 3 minutes. Tell us whatever you'd like. Just do it in 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and voice on the air. If you don't want to do that, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.